Harp on Sports with Seth Harp.
You know what time it is.
3, 2, 1. Let's do this.
Go, bartender! Your food needs refill!
Harp on Sports, the Bar Podcast Media, Audio, and Radio Network. What do we have in store for you on this edition of the program? The ACC Angst appears to have come to an end. Florida State, Clemson, happy now. A new deal with the Atlantic Coast Conference. Why this deal is just temporary, but it stops the bleeding. It's not a long-term solution, but a solution for the rest of the decade. We're going to look at that. Also, a spring game shakeup as spring games being canceled, done away with across the country. When it comes to college football, why this took this long is beyond me. And there's one thing to blame for it. One thing. And every school's guilty of it. So are you. So am I. So we're going to look at that as well. And also a little NCAA bracket bracing. Final 2 weeks before conference tournaments begin, or at least the big boy conference tournaments begin. And we're to the point now where, you know, if you're a 1 seed, you're in locked jaw. You've got it grabbed. If you're Houston, if you are Duke, it's going to really be tough for them to blow it. 4 SEC teams trying to circle 2 spots at the top seed line. Whoever doesn't get it probably going to fall to the top 2 seed line. So we're going to look at that as well. Again, Harp on Sports, the Bar, Podcast Media, Audio, Radio Network. Follow, share, like, subscribe at Harp on Sports, Twitter at Harp on Sports, Instagram, Harp on Sports, the Bar, the auditory route. Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Harp on Sports Facebook page, Harp on Sports YouTube channel, and of course, harponsports.com. All right, let's start off with this. Let's start off first with the ACC, a little kumbaya, if you will. Florida State, Clemson, good to go. Good to go with their new deal. What are they calling this? The structure of this, brand initiatives. I was about ready to say grant of rights deal. That is something separate. Through 2036, that still is in place for the next 11 years. Part of the massive deal that they signed last decade. Upset with it. Not getting the revenue share that the Big Ten, the SEC getting. And this brand initiative helps slow the bleeding of that a little bit. Again, when you're talking about where we are now with NIL money, when you are where we are with just the arms race that college football has become, college sports have become, you need to pool as much cash as possible. And Florida State, Clemson didn't like their situation, so what did? They sued. And what do they get out of it? They get a bigger chunk of change. Clemson and Florida State each can earn up to $120 million over the course of the next 5 years. How? You may say. Now, this is in addition. Look, if they go to the college football playoff, make a deep run, get to the college football playoff championship game, there's ways to earn extra cash. You go to the Final Four in college basketball. You have success in the postseason. That money still remains the same. But this is essentially more consumption equals more cash. So Clemson is the most consumed team in the ACC when it comes to football. Okay, well, over the course of these 5 years, they're going to pool the money. It's a rolling 5-year thing. Brand initiative, if you are in the top, you're going to get more money. So the athletic director, Grant Nett at Clemson, came out and said, this is now consistent with the objectives we set out initially. In other words, we're going to sue. We want a higher percentage. And when we get that higher percentage, we're going to be happy, or we're going to try to leave. Now, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the Big 12. That's where they were going to head, or at least that's where they were going to try to head. So now with this money, they just get a bigger chunk of the pie. Look at all the ACC teams. Clemson and Florida State essentially put themselves in a position to get a double share. When Texas started the Longhorn Network with the Big 12, they got a bigger chunk of change. That's exactly what this is. They get a bigger piece of the pie. They do. And as long as they finish in the top 5, there's where they're going to be. Now, what the other big objective out of this, and I think is maybe the more important one, is the buyout. How do they get out of this? How do they get out of this conference? Florida State and Clemson trying to get out of this, it was going to cost them $700 million, or could have cost them up to $700 million to get out of the ACC. That's a big chunk of change. That wasn't going to happen. There's nobody can afford that type of a buyout. With this new restructured deal, it is now down to $165 million to get out of it. That's still a gigantic chunk of change. But in 2030, it falls down to $75 million. Why is 2030 significant? That's when the Big Ten deal is up. That is when the SEC TV deal is up. So when the SEC and the Big Ten TV deals are up, Clemson's buyout, Florida State's buyout, is only going to be $75 million as opposed to the $700 million today. So they made it at least cash flow beneficial for them to stay in the conference for the next 5 years. And then in 5 years, everybody's going to come after the ACC. Who knows where college sports are going to be in 5 years? Who knows what it's going to look like in 5 years? No idea. Where's the NIL going to end up with all of this? Where's the college football playoff going to be in 2030? I do know this, though. This grant of rights deal through 2036, that's not going anywhere. The TV network's going to hold on to that unless they want to opt out of it. Major League Baseball ESPN opting out of the Major League Baseball deal just solidifies this even more. They've got more cash. You know, how much they paid for the NBA, and look, they're freeing up money here, and they're just not going to let a lot of these properties go, and college football is not going to be one that they let go, especially as long as Notre Dame's still in this revolving slate inside of the ACC with 5 games. You know what I thought was interesting about this is Georgia Tech and Florida State and Georgia Tech and Georgia, 2 monumental games in terms of finances that push Georgia Tech into the top 5. So if you get in the top 5, you're going to get a bigger cut of cash in terms of consumption. It's not as much for basketball as it is for football, but this, as long as Florida State's good, and this year they weren't, and Clemson's good, they're going to get a bigger chunk of change. It makes it more palatable. They're not going to get Big Ten money. They're not going to get $85, $90 million a team. They're not going to get SEC money, $85, $90 million a team a year, but they're going to get in the 40, 50s, and then if they perform well and earn 70, it makes it palatable. It does. It gets you close. It gets you close. So there's where we are. And again, that 60% of the revenue that they're going to share there at the top, it's if people like you more, people watch you more, you're going to get more of the money. It makes sense. It's an equity distribution, right? Now, could you imagine that in the NFL? What would that mean? That would mean the Cowboys, the Chiefs. Just think about your big revenue drawers. That means those programs, or at least those franchises, would get more money. Franchises that don't draw nationally would get burned, but that's the name of the game. So I have to look at it like this. You know, on Halloween, they put the basket out that says, just take one. Okay. Well, Pitt gets one. Virginia Tech gets one. Virginia gets one. Florida State and Clemson get 2. That's pretty much the rub of this. So there we go. So the ACC angst quelched, at least for the better part of the next half decade. And that's how you get deals done, right? You push it off for 5 more years. Whew. Now we get a chance. Who knows what it's going to look like in 5 years, but give you a chance to reset. From that to this, college football, all of a sudden, something is about ready to go extinct. And that's spring football games. Do you know who killed it? The schools. Do you know why they killed it? Because they could. It's not about denying you as a consumer more access to more things. It's quite the opposite. You know what killed spring football? Social media. It did. I went back through and looked 20 years ago, or at least we're getting close to 20 years ago. Nebraska drew 70,000 people to their spring game. Then Alabama hires Nick Saban. In 07, they draw 90,000 to their spring game. And here we are 2 decades later, and spring games they've lost their zip. What changed it? Social media changed it. Now, institutions have social media managers that churn out content, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook. They are flooding the social media sphere with content, with highlights, plays every day. It used to be you played in your bowl game. Okay, now what? Then you didn't see, hear, smell anything to do with the football program. You had recruiting news and things of that nature, but you didn't get to see anything. Maybe some B-roll footage on the news of somebody catching a pass in a drill, but you didn't actually get to see anything until the spring game. It's supply and demand every single day. D1 programs across the country are churning out 4, 5, 6 different pieces of content. So you get to see these players every day. So if you get to see receivers, you get to see quarterbacks, you get to see players every single day. If you follow these teams on social media, why would you watch it? Why would you go to a spring game? Attendance dips. It's not as special anymore. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar to what all-star games aren't as special anymore. Well, why? Well, players don't want to get hurt. They've got so much more money. But B, you see them all the time. I just remember when I was a kid how cool it was to see the Seattle Mariners take on the White Sox in Chicago. I never got to see Seattle. I grew up in Indiana. I never got to see that. Here's a team that you never, ever saw. This is even before the 6 p.m. Sports Center kicked in, or you just never got to see these teams. And then all of a sudden, Ken Griffey Jr. is part of the Mariners. You get to see him a little bit more. The internet kicks off, and boom, the world changes. So there were teams that you didn't even know that they even played. You knew that they existed because of the newspaper. But you never got to see them, ever. Ever. And you never got to see teams in the Western time zone if you were in the East or Mid. You never got to see them. So what happened? All-Star Games was a special, unique spot. I remember how cool it was to see Mark McGwire. Was it 1987? In the All-Star Game. How cool that was. Because you'd see a couple highlights, but you never... Now you see them every hour. Highlight every hour if you wanted to. Go back and watch archive footage. It's just... The uniqueness is gone. So, the A game, was it the 8A game for Alabama when they said they're not going to televise that anymore? Yeah, why would you? What killed it? We killed it. The programs killed it. Why is something special if you get it all the time? It's not as special. So that's what happened there. And, essentially each of these programs are their own state media institutions. They control their own narrative. They push out their own consumption. It's a smart business model. It is. You build lifelong consumers this way. You make more money. People subscribe to channels. You can sell advertising. You make more money by doing it this way. It comes at a cost, though. Our all-star games in sports aren't as special anymore. Why? Well, you see players all the time. Spring ball, spring games, going extinct because of social media consumption. Just the way it is. Not going to change. Not going to change. I'm surprised it took this long. I really am. I'm surprised it took this long. Wanted to wrap with this, and I think this is so interesting. I looked at the latest bracket projections, and we got 2 weeks left in the regular season. To me, the two teams, that should have the easiest time getting top seeds are Houston and Duke because of their conferences. Now, the job that Auburn has done, and I'm going to give you some numbers on Auburn and why Auburn, look, if Auburn goes 3-1 these next 2 weeks, I find it hard for Auburn not to get a 1 seed too. But Houston and Duke, just because of who they play down the stretch, they should kind of cakewalk to the 1 seeds. So you got 4 SEC teams vying for those final 2 seeds. I think Auburn should pretty much be a lock, and I think after this week, if they can go 2-0 this week, they pretty much are. Now Houston and Duke can give it back. Look, they lose once or twice, they can give it back. But I was going through and looking at some numbers on Auburn. Good gracious. You look at your quad 1, quad 2, all that dance. Auburn's 16-2 against quad 1 and 5-0 against quad 2. They're 21-2 against quad 1 and quad 2 teams. It's not even close. Nobody's even close to that. Nobody's even in the ballpark of that. 16-2 against quad 1 teams. 5-0 against quad 2. To me, Auburn's one solid week. Now they could lose 2 and then lose right away in the SEC tournament. But look, they're too good. They laid an egg. They laid an egg against Florida a couple weekends ago. Happens. But overall, structure-wise, good gracious. And you look at a team like, Houston, what are they, 8-4 in quad 1, 9-0 in quad 2. So they're 17-4, where Auburn's 21-2, Houston's 17-4. See, Yeah, they've got 4 losses in the quad 1 though, as opposed to Auburn's 2, and then Tennessee 10-5 in quad 1, 4-0 in quad 2. So then you start 14-5, and then Duke sits there at 6-3 in quad 1, 6-0 in quad 2, 12-3 behind the 2. These 4 teams to me are 1 through 4, and then you start to have some questions. And how this is going to shake out by the looks of it is right now you have what? You have Auburn and Tennessee out of the SEC, and then you have Bama and Florida peeking around the corner going, hey, what about us? What about us? Yeah, what about you? Now, Louisville's having a good year. There's 3 teams atop the ACC, and all of a sudden, what? North Carolina's won 4 or 5 in a row, so they're trying to make a run, but that's not a quality grab at this point. If Duke will be playing them coming up here again. I just look at it. The one thing Florida has going against them is Florida sits there at 6-4 in the quad 1, and what? In quad 2, what do I have them at 9-0? So they've done a nice job, but with 4 losses, Tennessee's got 5 losses in there. So you start to compare Tennessee to Florida, and it's close. It's close. What happened? Well, you crush Tennessee at your place. You lose to them by double digits at their place. Maybe that's the matchup in the SEC tournament that determines one of the other, but it's close. It's close. So what? Auburn, Houston, Tennessee, Duke. You're right there. And then Bama, Florida, Michigan State. I know. Michigan State sits there 10-3, quad 1, 7-2, quad 2. So you've got your Big Ten team, right? So you've got SEC still under this of the top 8, 4 SEC teams. And then the Big Ten pokes its head around the corner with Michigan State. Duke pokes its head around the corner with the ACC. Houston with the Big 12. Pac-12 doesn't. What the Pac-12's highest, and there's Oregon. The Pac-12 is just not shoving anything into the ecosphere. It's not, or the artist formerly known as the Pac-12. I should say that. Right, Oregon out of the Big Ten. I'm Washington State. They're just not shoving anything out that direction. West Coast, I guess it would be Oregon, would be the highest seeded team out of the West Coast region. I said Pac-12 West Coast. Is a 5. I just don't. There's not a lot out there. So you try to find these awesome brackets, and everything is so concentrated in the South and in the Big Ten. Seriously, look: Auburn South, Houston South, Tennessee South, Duke East Coast, but then you have Bama South, Florida South. There's no Gonzaga this year. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no, UCLA's okay, but they're not a top 25 team. And you look at any index, it's kind of where it is. So where am I going with this? Well, Auburn's in great shape. Alabama, Florida, as you sit there, Alabama and Florida have a big clash this week where you've got 5 and 6. The first two seeds. The top two seeds sitting there. If Florida can go in there and win, I think this is what's at stake here. If Florida or Alabama, whoever wins that this week, locks up a 2 seed, at least a 2 seed. Auburn wins 2 games, they're going to lock up a 1 seed, as they should. Still a long way to go with this, but boy, if Houston and Duke don't lose, they're going to be 1 seeds. The question that you have is, what if a Florida or Alabama wins the SEC? If Florida would win the SEC or Alabama would win the SEC, does that knock Tennessee out and put one of those 2 in the 1 line? Because I think Auburn is getting itself in position where it doesn't matter what it does in the SEC. I mean, you're 21-2, quad 1 and quad 2 teams. It's just remarkable what they've done. So, it's bracket bracing time. Okay, here we go. Deep breath. 2 weeks left in the regular season. Any of these teams out here go 3-1. Especially if you're Auburn. If you're Auburn, you go 3-1. If you're Tennessee, you go 3-1. You're going to have to get bounced in the first round of the SEC tournament probably to fall out of this sucker. If you're Alabama, you go 3-1. Florida 3-1. If your loss is to Bama, then you may have to win, a couple games. But I think the Florida Bama winner locks up a 2 seed at least. And then who knows what Michigan State gives you here and the Big Ten, and if they win the Big Ten and they finish 29-7 or what, yeah, gonna be right there in the thick of things as well. So bracket bracing, 4 games to go, 3-1 by Auburn. I think 2-2 by Auburn, and they're a 1 seed, but we'll see. But there's where you go. So yeah, all these teams. You're not gonna have 4 SEC teams. They just play each other. That's the other thing too. I'm leaving out of here is that the SEC teams all have to play each other a couple more times. Where Duke can go on its merry journey. Houston can go on its merry journey with what's going on in the Big 12 and the ACC. When I said it's all said and done, what do I think is going to happen? I think Auburn will be a 1. I think Duke will be a 1. I think Houston will be a 1. And then, it's going to be tough for Florida going to Alabama in 1, but they already went into Auburn in 1. The Bama-Florida winner and Tennessee, they clash in the SEC tournament. The winner of that will get the other one. I think that's where we're headed. Harp on Sports, the Bar, podcast, media, audio, radio network. Follow, share, like, subscribe at Harp on Sports Twitter, at Harp on Sports Instagram. I should add Harp on Sports X. Harp on Sports Auditory Route, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Harp on Sports, the Bar, YouTube page, Harp on Sports, Facebook page, and of course, harponsports.com. Remember, stay clean, stay focused, stay strong. Frankenstein, have fun with your friends.